The music stopped mid-song when he stood up. Our son was still holding his bride's hand, the crowd glowing with champagne, smiles, until he cleared his throat. "My friends," my husband said, gripping the mic, "today's not just our son's wedding. It's also the day I'm ending mine." Gasps rippled through the hall. I felt every eye turned toward me, waiting for a breakdown, a scream, something dramatic. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. I simply smiled, calm, composed, terrifyingly quiet. He didn't know yet, but the smile meant his perfect new life had already fallen apart. The air was warm and full of laughter that evening. Fairy lights danced above the garden, and a soft tune played from the live band. I could see Daniel, my son, holding his bride's hand, his face glowing with that brand new kind of happiness that makes a mother's heart swell. I'd waited years for this moment, even when things between me and Mark, my husband, started to fall apart. I promised myself I'd make Daniel's wedding unforgettable, not for what was broken, but for what was beginning. Mark had been distracted for months. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences, a phone that always seemed to buzz just out of my reach. I'd stopped asking questions the day I realized his answers weren't worth hearing. Still, I smiled through it all. For Daniel, for appearances, for the quiet dignity that every woman wears when the truth is too heavy to carry out loud. That night, everything shimmered, crystal glasses clinked, laughter rippled through the air, and even Mark seemed in good spirits. He gave a speech at the start, all charm and polished humor. He was always good at pretending. After the first dance, he stood up again. He tapped his glass gently, that signature confident smile spreading across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what a beautiful night to celebrate love, family, and new beginnings." Everyone quieted down, the music faded, and even the waiters froze mid-step. I thought he was going to toast our son again. That would have been the normal thing to do. But Mark had never been one for kindness. He preferred grand gestures, especially the kind that left scars. He took a deep breath, looked directly at me, and said, "Tonight isn't just the start of Daniel and Emily's life together. It's also the end of mine and Linda's. After 30 years, I've decided to start a new chapter. I'm filing for divorce." There was a second of silence, the kind that cuts through music, through air, through bone. Then came the gasps, the whispers, the wide eyes. My son froze mid-step on the dance floor, his bride's fingers trembling around his hand. My sister covered her mouth. The band looked lost, clutching their instruments like shields. And me, I stood there, feeling the world slow down. I could see every stunned face, every curious glance, and I realized this was the moment he'd been waiting for. He wanted spectacle. He wanted control. He wanted my reaction. But instead, I gave him a smile. A calm, soft, deliberate smile. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't pride. It was peace, the kind that comes when you've already buried your heartbreak. Weeks ago, because what he didn't know was that I'd found his secret long before this night. 3 days earlier, I'd been in his office, helping finalize the seating arrangements for the wedding. He'd left his laptop open, careless as always. And there it was, right on the screen, an email to Ashley M., his assistant. "I can't wait to finally be free of her after the wedding. You deserve everything she had." Everything she had. I stared at those words until my reflection blurred in the screen. Not everything we built. Not what we shared. Everything I had. That was the moment I stopped crying. Mark thought I was the fragile, predictable kind of woman, the one who breaks quietly in the background. But he'd forgotten who paid for his first office space, who stayed up nights editing his pitches, attending his meetings, building his reputation while raising a child alone. He forgot that half his empire had my fingerprints on it, so while he rehearsed his grand betrayal, I made a few moves of my own. By the time he printed those divorce papers, my attorney had already filed a claim tying my investments to his business assets. By the time he bragged about his new downtown office, I'd quietly placed a lien on the property. And by the time he thought he'd publicly humiliate me, I'd made sure that half his new chapter legally belonged to me. Back at the wedding, the silence was suffocating. I could feel the crowd waiting for me to scream, to storm out, to crumble. Instead, I reached for my glass of champagne, raised it gently, and said, "Congratulations, Mark. On your honesty. I think everyone deserves a clean start." The shock in his face was almost comical. He hadn't prepared for grace. Then I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small white envelope. He frowned. "What's this?" "Just something to remember me by," I said softly, handing it to him. I placed my hand briefly on his arm, the way you do when you're comforting a stranger. Then I turned to Daniel, kissed his forehead and whispered, Enjoy your night, sweetheart." Mark tried to laugh it off, raising the envelope for the crowd to see. "Linda's always so dramatic," he joked. "What's this? Divorce papers of her own." People laughed nervously, unsure if it was safe too. I walked toward the exit, feeling hundreds of eyes burning into my back. And just as I reached the door, I heard him tear open the envelope. A beat of silence. Then his voice, strangled and low. "What the hell is this?" I didn't look back, but I knew exactly what he was. Holding the notarized deed transfer, papers that showed my legal claim to his company's main property. Signed, filed, stamped. By the time he'd decided to announce my end, I'd already written his. I stepped into the night air, the cool breeze touching my face, the sound of his muffled shouting echoing behind me, and I smiled again, not because I won, but because I finally felt free. Free from pretending, free from holding the pieces together alone, free from a man who mistook silence for weakness. Inside, the guests began whispering. Some pitied me, some admired me, but none of them knew that my smile wasn't hiding pain, it was hiding power. Mark had tried to destroy me publicly, but what he didn't realize was he'd just introduced everyone to the woman who would rebuild everything without him. For the next 2 days, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, family, even journalists. Apparently, the video of Mark's announcement had gone viral among our social circle, the way gossip does when there's money, marriage, and humiliation involved. But what shocked everyone wasn't the divorce, it was my reaction. People expected tears, a scene, maybe even a slap. Instead, they saw a calm woman smile, hand her husband an envelope, and walk out with her head high. "Linda, you're trending in our city's private Facebook group," my friend Carol laughed over the phone. "Half the women are calling you an icon, the other half are terrified you exist." I smiled quietly. It wasn't fame I wanted, it was peace, and I finally had it. Mark, however, did not buy Monday morning. He called me 5 times, then 10. Then he showed up at my office. Yes, my office. The same one that used to be his. The receptionist's voice trembled when she buzzed me. "Mrs. Collins, your husband is here. He looks well, upset." I looked up from my desk, took a slow sip of coffee, and said, "Send him in." He stormed in, red-faced and furious. "What the hell did you do?" "Linda, you'll need to be more specific," I said calmly. He slammed the envelope, now wrinkled, on my desk. "You signed over my building, my company. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I met his eyes. "Correction, our company. My money started it, my time built it, and my signature protected it. You just finally noticed." He looked like a man who had just realized his kingdom had no walls. "This isn't fair," he yelled. "Neither was announcing our divorce at our son's wedding," I replied softly. He went silent. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. Later that evening, I learned from a mutual friend that his assistant Ashley had quit the day after the wedding. Apparently, she didn't like men who had nothing left. Mark had moved into a rental apartment, trying to sell off his cars to cover debts. It turned out that during his attempt to impress her with new investments, he'd mortgaged most of his assets, the same ones now under my name. I didn't ruin him, his arrogance did. I simply allowed karma to use my paperwork. Weeks turned into months. I threw myself into rebuilding my own life, not as someone's wife, but as a woman with her own name on the office door. Daniel visited often. He was still angry at his father but proud of me. "Mom," he said one evening, "I watched that video again. The way you smiled. It was scary, like you knew something no one else did." I laughed. "Maybe I did." "You didn't even look hurt," he said quietly. "Oh, I was," I admitted. "But there's a kind of pain that stops hurting once you stop fighting for the wrong person." One rainy morning, I got another call from Mark. This time, his voice was small. "Linda, I just wanted to talk." I agreed to meet him at a cafe downtown. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. The confident man who once strutted through boardrooms looked tired. "You look good," he said awkwardly. "Freedom suits me," I replied. He tried to smile, then sighed. "I lost everything, Linda. The business, the car, even Ashley. I don't know where to start." I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Maybe start where you went wrong with yourself." He nodded slowly. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said honestly. "You're not worth the energy it takes to hate." There was a silence between us, not the tense kind, but the sad kind that comes after a storm has passed. For the first time in years, I felt nothing. No love, no anger, just closure. A month later, my company received an invitation, the Women in Business Summit keynote. Speaker Linda Collins. When I stepped onto that stage, under the bright lights, I thought of that night at Daniel's wedding, the humiliation, the whispers, the envelope, and that smile. That smile had become my armor, the moment I stopped letting someone else define my worth. Sometimes, I told the audience, the moment they try to break you is the moment you finally break free. Don't fear endings, fear staying somewhere you've already outgrown. Applause filled the hall, cameras flashed, and somewhere out there, I knew Mark would see it, the woman he thought he could destroy, standing taller than ever. That night, Daniel called. Mom, Dad called me today. He said he's proud of you. I paused. Really? Yeah, he said. He said you taught him what strength really looks like. I smiled, not out of satisfaction, but peace. Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's power. The kind that lets you move on while others are still frozen in regret. As I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out over the city skyline. The moonlight caught the edge of the envelope I'd framed on my desk, the one I handed him that night. The symbol of my quiet revenge. I whispered to myself, thank you for announcing our ending, because you had no idea it was my beginning. If you've ever been betrayed, remember, dignity is the sweetest revenge. You don't have to scream to be heard or fight to prove your worth. Sometimes, the calmest smile is what ends the loudest lies. What would you have done if your husband humiliated you in front of everyone? Like if you believe karma never forgets. Share this story with someone who needs strength, not sympathy. Subscribe for more true stories of love, betrayal, and the power of quiet revenge, because every ending hides a beautiful new beginning.